First, before diving into potential hair loss treatments, we need to understand categories of hair loss and the reasons they happen. To understand hair loss, we also need to understand that hair is not always actively growing. It moves through a cycle in 3 phases, and 2 of the 3 conditions that we're going to discuss inside today's show are defined what's happening to that cycle. Welcome to sammillerscience, where you're joining me nearly 2 decades into my personal journey to bridge the gap between macros, metabolism, muscle, and medicine. If you're joining me, thanks for trusting me to elevate your health and realize your true potential. Each week and inside every episode, I'll be sharing methods and models from my coaching journey and my personal experience, as well as the science that you need to achieve whatever specific goals you're working on in your life. Let's jump in to today's show. Hair loss is one of the most common health concerns out there, and it's one of the most mishandled, and it directly impacts someone's confidence and the way they feel when they look in the mirror. Whether you're the person watching more hair come out in the shower than you're used to, or you're a health coach hearing it from a client on a check-in, the standard response tends to be the same. People talk about maybe adding more protein or just manage your stress or take a hair loss supplement. And sometimes that response lines up with the actual mechanism of hair loss. And just as often, though, it may have nothing to do with it. The real reason hair loss gets mishandled is that it isn't just one condition. There's actually a variety of different reasons that people may lose their hair. There's at least 3 completely separate physiological pictures that look similar enough on the surface to be confused for each other, while requiring different interventions underneath. Whether it's hair loss that a woman's experiencing into an aggressive diet phase and she's seeing hair shedding, or a man whose hairline has been retreating for the past year in a classic horseshoe pattern, or maybe a Hashimoto's client who's showing up with small patches of complete hair loss. The body produces a category of feedback that you can read without ordering a single lap. And so oftentimes I refer to this as biofeedback, and we'll talk about sleep or hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, and stress, but that biofeedback isn't limited to those things. Hair loss is also a form of biofeedback, and so are things like skin health and acne. So hair belongs squarely inside this conversation, and it's one of the visible indicators that tends to shift early when nutrient status falls short, or we see changes in stress or immune status. 100% of the choices that people make about their health, whether it's their training, their calorie intake, their sleep, stress, and supplementation, all change their internal health and internal environment. First, before diving into potential hair loss treatments, we need to understand categories of hair loss and the reasons they happen. To understand hair loss, we also need to understand that hair is not always actively growing. It moves through a cycle in 3 phases, and 2 of the 3 conditions that we're going to discuss inside today's show are defined what's happening to that cycle. So the first phase is called the anagen phase. This is the active growth phase for your hair. Scalp hair grows about 1 centimeter a month during anagen, and the phase lasts anywhere from 2 to 6 years, depending on the person. Someone who could never really grow their hair long likely has a shorter anagen phase by genetic default. The next is catagen. This is a short transition phase where the hair stops growing and prepares to enter dormancy. About 3% of hair is here at any given time. Then there's the telogen phase, and this is like a resting phase where the hair has stopped growing and has thinned somewhat and is waiting to fall out so the cycle can restart. About 6 to 8% of hair sits in this state on a normal day, and the average person is going to shed about 50 to 100 telogen hairs daily. That's the hair that you'll see on a hairbrush or on your pillow or in the shower, and that is normal. Now, there can be times when we have excess hair loss and shedding. The problem is when the ratio shifts. So when a much larger percentage of hair is forced into telogen at once, you get visible thinning across the whole scalp. When it comes to the different types or categories of hair loss, androgenetic alopecia is the first and most well-known of the 3. The label is what most people use to describe male pattern baldness, or like if we were just talking about this casually amongst friends, usually we'll see things like male pattern baldness mentioned or in ads. The label is a little incomplete though, because this type of androgenetic alopecia can happen to women with elevated androgens, and it's one of the more common causes of hair loss in cases of PCOS. In men, androgenetic alopecia shows up as that classic horseshoe receding hairline, starting slow and then potentially even starting later in life. About 30% of white males experience it by age 30, 50% by age 50, and 80% by age 70. And in women with elevated androgens, the presentation can mirror some of what we're seeing in men. Now, a lot of people assume that if you have high testosterone, you're going to lose your hair. And that assumption is actually incomplete because the skin itself has all the machinery it needs to produce its own testosterone and convert it to DHT or dihydrotestosterone. Really, that conversion is more of what's happening at the scalp level. And And that DHT is more androgenic than testosterone and is the main driver of follicle damage in this condition. What's interesting is what this means for blood panels and serum lab interpretation. A man with circulating testosterone of 350 nanograms per deciliter can still go bald, while a man at 1100 nanograms per deciliter can keep a full head of hair, because the difference isn't just the bloodstream, but actually at the level of the follicle itself, where the androgen receptor density and the amount of 5-alpha reductase activity in the skin and the way it responds to whatever DHT is present, all of that locally are really the variables that are driving the outcome. So when DHT binds the androgen receptor in the follicle, it drives oxidative stress, which damages the follicle over time and can thin the hair shaft and eventually shuts the follicle out of the anagen growth phase entirely. The standard pharmaceutical options for androgenetic alopecia are Minoxidil and 5-alpha reductase inhibitors like Finasteride. Minoxidil works mostly by increasing hair diameter, so the existing hair looks a little fuller and thicker. Side effects, though, can include rashes on the skin, headaches, dizziness, and some people even experience chest pain. Finasteride, or sometimes you'll hear people talk about this as finasteride. There's also dutasteride that's inhibiting the enzyme that converts testosterone to DHT, which does address the mechanism, but it comes with a real side effect profile, even including depression, anxiety, low libido, erectile dysfunction, potential gynecomastia, and even a rebound effect in terms of hair loss upon discontinuation. The alternatives are interesting because they target some of the same downstream mechanisms, things like oxidative stress in the follicle, but they don't have the same systemic hormonal effects on things like mood and libido. So GHK copper is a popular peptide that's strongly anti-inflammatory and can serve as an antioxidant and can be applied topically. The thought process here is reducing oxidative damage in the follicle without touching androgen levels at all. Carbon-60 is a free radical scavenger that does something similar through different mechanisms. There's several topical products that combine the two. PRP injections or platelet-rich plasma take it a step further. Blood is drawn, and then the platelet-rich fraction is separated and injected into the scalp, and then vascularization around the follicles improves, and then the follicles get pushed back into that anagen phase. The protocol with the most support is 3 monthly sessions, followed by 3 bi-monthly sessions of PRP. You can also use red light therapy, or this is also known as photobiomodulation, but I think most people just know of it as red light therapy. And that stimulates mitochondrial activity at the hair follicle stem cells, which pushes more follicles into active growth. So 20 to 60 minutes of exposure on a daily basis is a working regimen to use red light as an intervention for hair loss and hair regrowth, really just kind of stimulating the cells in the scalp. Telogen effluvium is the second category, and it's lifestyle-driven hair loss caused by something pushing a large percentage of hair into the telogen phase at a single time. The hair thins across the whole head rather than a pattern or in patches, and when you brush your hair is typically when you're seeing clumps come out. The data indicates that this affects women more than men, but men almost certainly underreport it because they assume any hair loss is just male pattern baldness, so they never really seek evaluation for this type of hair loss. But telogen effluvium matters specifically because it's downstream of choices and circumstances that you usually identify and change, whether you're auditing your own lifestyle or maybe you're a health coach and you're helping a client work through some of this stuff. So the drivers of telogen effluvium are mostly lifestyle and related to your internal health and physiology. So when you have chronic caloric restriction, metabolic adaptation, fatty acid deficiencies in zinc, iron, vitamin D, or biotin, or things like chronic overtraining or sleep loss, and even hypothyroidism or anemia, that can trigger this type of hair loss. When someone's been in a hard calorie deficit or just steep calorie deficit for 6 to 8 months and their hair starts thinning, what's happening is follicle activity is typically getting down regulated because of micronutrient deficits and also just calorie deficits not having enough energy availability, because follicle maintenance does have this metabolic cost. So just think of the dieting and prolonged restriction leading to the follicle shifting into that telogen phase. So hair is one of the first systems downregulated under energy constraints, especially when it's prolonged. And then there's medications that can affect this as well. So common medications that drive this category of hair loss would be oral birth control, certain antidepressants. There's also skin medications like Accutane, blood pressure medications, and beta blockers, as well as ACE inhibitors that can contribute to hair loss. If a new medication started around the same time that someone's experiencing shedding, then it's worth exploring that connection and having a follow-up conversation with the prescribing physician who gave them the script for that medication. The good news is telogen effluvium is reversible hair loss. So once the upstream cause is resolved or the root cause is resolved, hair growth can resume. There is a catch though, which is there's a lag time. So even after you fix the input, it can take hair 3 to 6 months to visibly recover because, we got to catch up to that hair timeline. When you replete micronutrients and maybe come back to maintenance calories or eating slightly more, understand that the absence of immediate improvement is not evidence that the change isn't working. Sometimes it's just going to take time for that hair to regrow. And first and foremost, we need to stop further hair loss, and then we're working on promoting regrowth. So whether you're working on this for your own hair or you're working with other people, coaching them in their transformation, really important to remember those timelines. You may not notice a difference for a couple weeks or even a couple months. Now, the third category of hair loss is alopecia areata. And unlike the first two categories of hair loss, it's autoimmune in nature. The presentation of this type of hair loss looks nothing like the first two. So instead of pattern thinning or diffuse thinning, you see small circular or oval patches of complete hair loss, which can show up on the scalp. It can show up in facial hair or beards and anywhere on the body. In rarer cases, it can progress to total hair loss. Underneath, the immune system is attacking keratin cells in the follicle. Cell division in the hair matrix stops and hair falls out. What's interesting is that alopecia areata co-occurs with Hashimoto's cases about 8 to 27% of the time. So anywhere from, you probably see 10% up to 30%. And depending on the study you look at, that number will change. So when someone has Hashimoto's and they're experiencing hair loss, what's important to see is if they're losing their hair in patches, so alopecia areata presents in discrete patches, and the hair loss treatment pathway forks completely versus someone who's maybe been chronically dieting or has hair shedding, and they're more in that telogen effluvium type hair loss. So for alopecia areata, the playbook is autoimmune adjacent. So addressing sleep and stress, as well as the diet and gut health. Published case study evidence and a significant body of clinical experience point to elimination diets that start to drive remission. So starting less restrictive with just gluten and dairy removal and seeing what happens with hair loss can be helpful. In one case study, gluten and dairy elimination combined with omega-3, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin A, and probiotics helped to promote significant hair regrowth in 2 months and full regrowth in 5 months. If that doesn't necessarily move the needle, you could go into a more aggressive autoimmune intervention. And then the topical interventions from earlier in the episode, GHK copper, carbon 60, and red light, stack on top of the nutritional work to accelerate regrowth once the immune piece is under control. So if anyone is experiencing hair loss themselves, or if you're working with clients who are struggling, some of the most useful things you can do before reaching for any type of treatment is first identify what category of hair loss you're experiencing. A receding hairline pattern may be androgenetic alopecia, and the relevant interventions there are typically topical, sometimes procedural, and some people will opt for pharmaceutical treatments. Diffuse thinning with shedding and seeing it in your brush is typically telogen effluvium territory, where the work is largely lifestyle based. And then there's autoimmune driven hair loss like alopecia areata, which is discrete patches of complete loss. And that's going to take a different approach. And we're really focused on soothing the immune system and calming immune activity. The same principle applies on the coaching side. So if you're a coach and you're not used to categorizing types of hair loss, or you see maybe men and women struggling with this and you'd like to be able to help them more, it's important to be able to separate the hair loss types and drive specific repeatable outcomes, not just randomly guessing like a lot of coaches who just say that they're a coach in their Instagram bio tend to approach these things. If you're a health coach, hair issues and skin concerns are things that require health professionals to operate at a higher clinical level. And it goes beyond just calorie sets, reps, and macros. And this is exactly what we cover inside the Functional Nutrition and Metabolism Specialization Program. And you can learn more in the show notes. Hair loss is just one example out of dozens. It could be gut issues, hormone cases, metabolic adaptation, recovery problems, cycle health concerns, fertility related concerns, so many topics that aren't covered in initial health certifications, but clients are bringing these to health coaches and they want help. They want to be able to dial in their nutrition, training, lifestyle, and supplementation to address these issues head on so that they can feel better. And confidence isn't just about their weight on the scale. Obviously, improving things like hair loss and skin health go a long way in delivering client results and also the person feeling more confident in their skin. If you enjoyed this episode and you think someone else would benefit or should learn about the 3 categories of hair loss, please share the show. If you learned something new, if it was entertaining, informative, or helped you pass the time, whether you're doing chores or on a road trip, drop a 5-star rating and review to support the show and help us reach more like-minded listeners like you and bring them back to our community so we can share this content with the world. You probably found the show because someone like you either shared it with you or dropped a rating and review so it popped up in your podcast feed, and my team and I greatly appreciate the support. Thanks so much for joining me today and learning all about hair loss. I'll talk to you in the next show.